Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sisters in Crime Atlanta's monthly author talk program, Off the Shelf. Today, I am very excited to have Mike Cobb with us. Mike is an Atlanta author, and he has written two books. He has written Dead Beckoning and The Devil You Know. He is his body of literary work includes both fiction and nonfiction, short form and long form, as well as articles and blogs. And while he is comfortable playing across a broad range of genres and topics, much of his focus is on historical fiction, Southern literary fiction, crime fiction, and true crime. Rigorous research is foundational to his writing. He gets that honestly, having spent much of his professional career as a scientist. Mike splits his time between Atlanta and Blue Ridge, Georgia. Hello, Mike. Welcome to Sisters in Crime Atlanta's Off the Shelf.
Hello, it's great to be here.
I'm sorry I had to read that verbatim. I don't try to memorize, but I try to know enough to speak eloquently when I am introducing an author. But I really wanted to make sure I hit those genres specifically, because I'm very interested in how you cross those different paths into your writing. So. But before we get there, I always like to start off by asking our authors to tell us a little bit about themselves, aside from what we can read about them in their book bio. And what I read was pretty much what is on your book jacket bio. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about you, aside from that information.
Okay. And I will I'll try to make this not too long. I'm an Atlanta native. I was born and reared here. Spent my formative years in Atlanta, except for a short 3-year period, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade in Jacksonville, Florida. My
Hmm.
parents moved back to Atlanta. I'm a Georgia Tech graduate. I was a scientist. This is a little aspect of my background that most people don't know, and I do think it has impacted sort of my passion for research, if you will. I have a PhD in quantum chemistry and spent much of my career either doing research or consulting. I started a consulting firm in 1998, basically helping companies sort of bridge business and science. So my day job was as a scientist and consultant. Um, I've written my entire life. The first thing I ever wrote, I think, was in maybe third grade, first creative writing I ever wrote. So I've had a passion for writing. I've never stopped writing, but it wasn't until a couple of years before I retired that I was really able to write, spend serious time writing. And I spent several years researching Dead Beckoning before I published it. And that was my first book. And as you mentioned in the bio, I love research. I love doing research as much as I love writing. I mean, those really are my two passions. And that's I think, one of the things that led me to writing historical fiction. I am fascinated by Southern history. My books take place in the South, at least so far. And I love learning about Southern history and writing about it. And the crime part of it actually came about as a result of a murder, a cold case from 1970. I was 17 years old, and a woman 6 years my senior sort of took me under her wing. I was this kid trying to find myself, and she took me under her wing and meant a lot to me. She was killed execution style. I have been working for several years now researching her death side by side with a private investigator. That's the true crime part of my bio. That story will be published at some point. But it is nonfiction, and it's just taking me a while. I find writing nonfiction, especially about a crime, when some of the people, some of the principals are still alive, two of the suspects are still alive. Um, Obviously, I am approaching that project with a great degree of trepidation. I'll just leave it at that, because of potential liability and things like that. But in any event, I think it was that experience that really made me, or that was the seed, if you will, of my interest in crime and in writing about crime.
Okay. All right. So that obviously to me seems like that was quite a traumatic. I am so sorry. I do not know what my dogs are barking at. And I'm the only one home, so I can't stop them from barking.
Well, I don't hear your dog, so
Okay, good, good. He's barking pretty loud. I'm surprised you can't hear him. But I can imagine that was really a traumatic experience, especially at 17 years old. And I totally get you not necessarily jumping in right away to that. I mean, I would imagine that you are expecting the proper processes of justice to come into play and try to give you some resolution to losing your friend, some sort of explanation, right?
yes,
So I can see where you would say, okay, I'm gonna, like I'm gonna keep an eye on this, but I'm gonna wait for the right thing to happen and to get some answers to this terrible thing. And so you're 17 and we already know you went to school, you went to Georgia Tech. And so you're not necessarily indulged in true crime yet.
right.
So you decide to go to tech. Tell us, we're going to get back to that, Mike. But tell us about tech and why tech, and then why quantum chemistry, which I do not know what that is, and then why science in general.
Oh my gosh.
You don't seem like you were a scientist focus up until that point, so I'm very curious.
I was the quintessential nerd. I think I still am a nerd at heart. Okay. And that's probably another reason I love doing research. I left high school a year early. Okay, so I was going to high school in Atlanta, in DeKalb County, and had an opportunity to leave high school a year early in what was called a joint enrollment program.
Hmm.
So I spent my senior year of high school at Georgia Tech um, as a freshman and high school senior, but I took all my courses at Georgia Tech. And I think in terms of undergraduate, I sort of took the path of least resistance. I was there. I liked it. I liked the environment. I liked my professors. I had chosen chemistry because at some point along the way, I think probably when I was in sixth or seventh grade, I really developed an interest in science. And then I had two incredible chemistry teachers in high school. And that's what I think sort of sealed the deal for me. It was those teachers who were instrumental in my pursuing the career path that I pursued. So I was at Georgia Tech, close to getting my bachelor's degree. I had developed a keen interest in physical chemistry, which quantum chemistry is a part of. And there was a professor there who was doing research that I was quite intrigued by. And so then again, I took the path of least resistance. And instead of looking elsewhere to go to graduate school, I said, I'm just going to stay at Georgia Tech and get my PhD at Georgia Tech. In retrospect, and I look, if I start rambling about stuff, pull me, rein me back in, okay? But in retrospect, I think I would have benefited from going to a graduate school different from where I got my undergraduate degree,
Okay.
just for a variety. I will tell you this though, and then we can move on unless you want to learn more about that period. I bent over backwards as an undergraduate at Georgia Tech to get a well-rounded liberal arts education, which at the time was very difficult.
I would imagine so.
I took
At Georgia Tech.
copious English classes. I took creative writing classes. I took philosophy classes and sociology classes because I was determined that I wasn't going to leave Georgia Tech without a well-rounded education.
Hmm.
And I had two of the most incredible English teachers at Georgia Tech that you can imagine. I tell people that and they're really shocked because we're taught
Hmm.
this was the 70s.
Hmm.
But they were absolutely wonderful and they had a significant impact on me from a writing standpoint.
Hmm.
They both passed away, but I think of them often.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that is amazing and it is surprising. And the one thing I want to say about Georgia Tech is it's very impressive. Like to be able to go to Georgia Tech and excel and graduate from Georgia Tech, especially with an undergraduate and a PhD. I mean, that's impressive. And
Well, you know what, Don?
certainly,
I don't know that I could get in today. I'm serious. I don't know that I could get in. It's gotten so hard to get into
yeah.
University of Georgia and Georgia Tech.
Absolutely. Georgia is difficult as well. I could have gone to the University of Georgia when I was graduating high school. I could not have gotten into tech, but I could have gone to Georgia. And simply, I think because I was a Georgia resident and graduated from a Georgia high school, it was that of course you have to have the, certain grades, but it wasn't as difficult as it is now.
Yeah,
Nowadays, it's tough.
it is
And
tough.
degrees are pursued also from outside of the state.
Hmm.
So Emory has a lot of international students. Georgia Tech is so elevated from, the science and architecture and, the hard science type degrees and stuff. And so, yeah, you're right. It is harder
It
these
is.
days, but I still am impressed because you
Well,
didn't
thank
just
you.
get in, Mike. You didn't
Thank
just get
you.
in, you graduated too.
Well,
So,
I am sitting here right now. So I split my time, as you mentioned, between Midtown and Blue Ridge. I'm sitting at our place in Midtown, right on the edge of the Georgia Tech campus.
oh,
And
okay.
so I'm over there all the time, and I'm still on the board of advisors of the College of Sciences. So
Hmm.
I'm still actively involved with Georgia Tech.
Hmm.
My wife and I walk through the campus all the time,
Hmm.
and I, I would say a vast majority of the students that we pass as we walk through the campus are foreign students.
Mm, yeah,
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 a lot
mhm,
of Asian students.
yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
that's raised the bar significantly.
yes. And I happen to know something that you did not mention, and I know this because we are friends on Facebook, and that you met your wife at Georgia Tech.
Yes, I
And
did.
you wrote a very sweet tribute to her. As a matter of fact, I saved it because I knew we were going to be talking in a few
Oh my
months.
gosh. Okay.
Yeah, it is so sweet. It's a picture of Karen, and you said, I remember the day you walked into Lyman Hall at Georgia Tech 49 years ago. I remember what you were wearing. I remember the smile on your face. I knew then we would spend our lives together. 2 years later, we were married. Happy 47th.
That is so sweet. That is so nice of you, Dawn, to have read that. Yeah, it tears me up a little bit. So
Here's
yeah,
me up too. It's
yeah.
very poetic and it tells us, it leads us into your writing, honestly. So you you had a career as a scientist, and yet somewhere along the way, and I don't know if the story of your friend plays a part of this, but somewhere along the way in this career, how many years, because you're retired now?
I'm retired now.
Okay. How many years did you work? Did you
I
have
got
a,
my PhD in 1980
okay.
and I retired 3 years ago. Okay.
Okay.
I still have one
So,
client, my favorite client.
mhm,
I was retired, I was writing, living my dream, right?
mhm.
Um, and I got a call from the one client that I loved more than any other. And they said, "Are you enjoying retirement?" And I said, "I'm loving it. I'm getting a lot of writing done, publishing books." And he said, "You want to do some work?" I said, "Well, maybe.
Depends.
It depends." So I work maybe 10 hours a month
Oh.
for this client. And it's nice because I can keep my saw sharp a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have to depend on it. And it
Right.
doesn't take up a lot of my time.
So you roughly 41 years in the working world.
Mhm.
And somewhere along the way, writing creatively had either it was always in your life and it was something you were dabbling in, but at some point it became more of a focus. Can you
Yes.
tell us about that?
Yeah. So I dabbled. Dabble is a good word. I didn't have a lot of time to do more than dabble because I was working and raising a family
And running a
and
business. You
and
said you
running a
started,
business,
yeah.
running a consulting business, which I started in '98. So the first 18 years
Mhm.
I was working for other companies, but then I started my consulting practice in '98. Um, yeah, so I didn't have a lot of time to write, but I did write, and it was dabbling. But I never stopped writing, and I've got a wealth of stuff that I've written over the years. Occasionally, I'll go back and read some of it, and I think, "Gosh, this was awful." But at least I was writing.
Yeah.
At least I was doing it. And then for 3 or 4 years before I actually retired, I started seriously researching for Dead Beckoning
Hmm.
and spent several years doing all the research for that book before I started writing it. And so there was that overlap of several years when I was still working but doing serious research, and I was literally spending every weekend at the Kennan Research Library at the Atlanta History Center,
Hmm.
um, and at the Georgia State uh, Library doing research for the book. And I think my wife had at one point began to wonder, okay, what you're leaving every Saturday and you're going to the research facility and you're spending all day doing research, but that's exactly what I was doing. And then I actually started writing Dead Beckoning maybe a year before I retired.
So
Yeah,
let's go back to you researching because the story I heard was your original research was not the story that you wrote. You were actually researching a historical Atlanta event.
that's correct.
Okay,
That's
so
correct. You've done your homework, John. That's good. Yeah, so I had become fascinated by, first of all, I love late 19th century Southern history. I had become fascinated by a world exposition that occurred in Atlanta, actually at Piedmont Park, at what is now Piedmont Park, in 1895, called the Cotton States and International Exposition. It was a World's Fair. I mean, there were exhibitors and buildings representing people from various countries all over the world. A lot of Central American countries, but also France and some European countries. And I was doing research to write a book about um, that World's Fair, that exposition. And I'm spending hours. This was before I was able to resource newspapers so readily on the internet. I was spending hours looking at newspaper articles on microfilm. So
Yeah.
I would go
I
find
remember microfilm.
I would find the reel in the car in the reel catalog, like, and I would take it out and I would feed it onto the roll and I would read the newspaper articles on
That's what
microfilm.
took so long.
It took a while, but you know what? I don't want to digress too much, but I miss that. There was
Oh.
something about that tactile,
Hmm.
that process of doing that that to me was it was an important part of that period in my life, if you will. And doing it on the internet is just not the same. I
Mm.
mean, I guess maybe I'm showing my age and my old-fashionedness, but I miss the microfilm actually. But anyway, so I was researching this exposition, and I'm reading these newspaper articles, and I stumble upon this murder, and I was just so curious about it. A prominent businessman was on his way to work one morning, and he was gunned down. I started reading about it, and then I go to the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day. And I went down that rabbit hole, if you want to call it that, and never came out. It was so fascinating. And then I realized at some point the murderer was never found. It was a cold case from 1895. There were some suspects. Um, so I took that story and I began researching that and I fictionalized it. Um, I had and the exposition, by the way, plays a significant role in the book. Okay. I have the benefit of the internet that obviously people in 1895 did not have. One
Mhm.
of the prime suspects just disappeared. Okay. And they had no idea where he went. I found him through the internet looking at census records from actually, he ended up in Mississippi. And then, like 6 months later, his family joined him.
Hmm.
Um, they had no way of knowing that. But I knew that because I had the benefit of the internet. So anyway, so that was the that was how Dead Beckoning came about.
So, when you were originally interested in learning about the exposition and you were going to write a book about that, was it going to be a mystery or was it
It
just,
was going to be a nonfiction
oh,
book about the exposition.
all right.
And that still may happen one day. I walk through Piedmont Park a lot because I can walk there easily from where I am here.
Mhm.
And there's very little remaining from the exposition. But I just love walking through Piedmont Park and imagining what it was like.
Mhm.
And I've got all of that material that I gathered when I was doing the research. I still at some point may write about it.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it was not going to be a mystery.
Right. And so, voila, here,
Voila.
surprise.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, and let's fast forward to your next book, which is The Devil You Knew.
Right.
And so we know how you stumbled upon the story that was the main, focus of Dead Beckoning. First off, let's summarize what The Devil You Knew is about.
Okay. The Devil You Knew, I would call it a combination of historical fiction, crime fiction, and a at least the first half of the book has a very significant coming of age component. Okay, think Stand by Me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As a matter of fact, some people who've read it have sort of have compared it to Stand by Me, the first half. So
Stand by Me. Who was that? Stephen King?
mhm,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so
I
I
had
had
to.
finished Dead Beckoning, and the idea for The Devil You Knew had been germinating in my head for a while. And a lot of it, I was reared the first through fifth grade. I was reared in East Atlanta. Okay, and much of Dead Beckoning, much of The Devil You Knew takes place in East Atlanta. And there were some girls who went missing. So there's an element of historical, truth in the book, but it is a work of fiction. So it is historical fiction.
And you recall that from when you were growing up in the area, like that is
Yes.
something that happened. Well, okay.
Yes. And I also
Okay.
recall well, so I recall a lot of things that are in that book are things that came about as a result of my tapping into my memory.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the book is about some girls who go missing. This little boy, Billy Tarwater, who's 11 years old, is infatuated with one of the girls who is 3 years older than he. And she doesn't want to have anything to do with him, but he's just really infatuated with her. And these girls go missing. And fast forward, oh, and a black man, Sam Jefferson, is basically accused of kidnapping and murdering these girls and goes to prison. Fast forward to 1981, 1980, really. Um, this little boy is now a young up and coming newspaper reporter for the Atlanta Journal and sets out to avenge what happened to these girls, find the true killer, and free an innocent man who was framed and sent to Reidsville prison.
Mm-hmm.
So the first half of the book takes place in 63. The second half takes place in 1980, a little bit in 81.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are a lot of elements of race. There are a lot of elements of I don't want to, I have to be very careful here because
Yes.
I don't want to impugn anyone's religious sensibilities or anything, but I spent the first few years of my life in a dreadful fire and brimstone Southern Baptist, you're going to burn in hell church. There are elements of that in the book. There's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that inspired me actually to write this book was a story by Flannery O'Connor called The Violent Bear It Away. And I don't want to give away too much because if
Mm-hmm.
you've read The Violent Bear It Away, you might begin to be able to connect the dots and understand why there's a parallel. If you read the book in its entirety, you will know why there's a parallel, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But so there is also there are the elements of race, there's the crime element, and there's the element of sort of the twisted nature, if you will, of fire and brimstone evangelical Southern Christianity, which I know some people would find that the way I have rendered it would find it off-putting, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of it's true to my own experience.
Well, that's a good point that you bring up, and I was gonna eventually get around to this. So you've opened the door for me. But both of your books, I happen to have copies of both, but both of your books start out with a word of caution.
Hmm.
And this is what is in the book. It says, a word of caution. In a work of period fiction, there is often tension between fidelity to the time period and the risk of offending the reader. Certain offensive words and cultural norms, which are unacceptable today, are used in this work. While the decision to use them was not taken lightly, their presence is important to the accuracy and integrity of the period. It is hoped that their incorporation will, at the very least, shed light on a time in our history when attitudes and mores that are taboo today were commonplace. Their use
Yes,
is not intended in any way to disrespect the reader or any group of people.
yes. I struggled with that mightily as I was writing Dead Beckoning
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what I said in that word of caution is true. You cannot write a late 19th century period piece
Mm-hmm.
in the South
Right.
and be true to voice
Mm-hmm.
without crossing over some lines that would be considered um, sacrosanct today. Okay, and it's also true of 1960s, the 1960s South as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to use certain language and express certain points of view and things like that that people today would find abhorrent. But I could not. I mean, if I had not done that, it would not have, the stories would not have rung true. They just would
Mm-hmm.
not have rung true.
Right.
I have
Um,
gotten very little pushback. I worried when Dead Beckoning was published, I lost sleep
mm,
worrying, oh my gosh, are people am I just going to encounter a wall of resistance because of this
mhm,
book? And it
right.
didn't happen.
Mhm,
A few people, two or three people, gave it 1 star and basically deemed it inappropriate. But I can't lose sleep over that
mhm.
anymore, you know?
Well, I think this is a struggle that a lot of authors have, regardless of what time period they're writing in. I would think that to authentically portray whatever they are trying to portray, they probably sometimes are struggling with, the direction they want to take their story into, and saying, oh, wait, I can't say that. I can't.
Yeah.
I need to find another way to another expression or something.
Hmm.
Um, because we have become much more aware of inappropriate language
Yeah.
that some of us have grown up with, or it's been around, or it's on television, and now we're being told, oh, no, no, you can't, don't say that. Don't use, don't use that language.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Some of it is like, I've seen some recent memes that are kind of funny, where a grandmother is talking to the grandchild, and the mom is interrupting, saying, no, 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 don't say bad child, say
Right.
that was not a good choice, things that are,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think it is a struggle. And we've had some authors on Off the Shelf that have talked about, one in particular was trying to write a historical crime fiction. It was based on an actual case, just like you.
Hmm.
And the publisher pushed back and said, you need to change something. And she said, but that part is true. Like, that is based on what really
Yeah.
happened. And
Yeah.
they were not interested in pursuing the project with her, out of the need to modify
Yeah.
modify history, so to speak. So I
Yeah. I
admire
get it.
yeah, I admire you, number one. I think the disclaimer is helpful, and it really speaks to some of the challenges that are out there. And I know we have a couple of authors here with us today, and I'm not sure if they have encountered anything like that in their writing, but I would be curious. I think it could be a much longer topic than what we have time for
Sure. Yeah.
today. But
Yeah.
so just going back to the two books, and how they're similar and how they differ. I get the feeling that Dead Beckoning is really a lot of recounting of an actual crime and the circumstances surrounding, even though you've fictionalized some things, it seems like there's a lot of historical accuracy in this,
Yes.
where this book, The Devil You Knew, was a jumping off point. The the historical part, this you said that that actually happened. There were some girls that had gone missing during that time period. That is more of storytelling and fictionalizing.
Yeah. So if you think about the genre of historical fiction, do you focus more on the historical aspect or the fiction aspect? And I think you hit the nail on the head. Dead Beckoning, there's much more of an emphasis on the historical part of historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And in The Devil You Knew, there's much more of an emphasis on the fiction part.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of local color, a lot of detail in um, The Devil You Knew that is historically accurate, but the essence of the story is more fictionalized in The Devil You Knew than it is in Dead Beckoning.
Mm-hmm. And initially I was thinking that 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 it had to do with, number one, you stumbled upon, while researching something else, you stumbled upon the story of an actual murder that happened that you decided to really investigate
Mhm.
and theorize on, right? Like you
Yes.
draw a conclusion in that, which is great. And then where the second story, you like did more character development, and the main character has a crush on this slightly older girl, and then yet you shared with us that something happened when you were 17 in your
Mhm.
own life to a
Mhm.
friend. And do you think that had some influence on how you structured the story and
I,
what
I, th
direction you took the story in?
I think it did. I think it did. Yeah, for sure. Um, there, without going into too much detail with respect to this true crime piece that I'm
Hmm.
working on, there are portrayals of some law enforcement detectives, for example, in The Devil You Knew, that are drawn from my personal experience
Mm.
and that are directly related to the murder of this woman, Susan Harold, who had taken me under her wing.
Hmm.
Um, there is a homicide detective. Well, let me just say this with respect to the true crime book, without going into too much detail. I knew one of the chief homicide detectives in the police force at the time that she was murdered. He was one of my parents' best friends.
Okay.
Um, Shortly after the murder, except for the bullets, which were diverted to the ballistics lab, every piece of evidence disappeared. We know what was in the evidence box. We've met with the Atlanta police. We've met with GBI. We've met with the Fulton County DA, assistant
Hmm.
DA. We've talked to people at the state crime lab. Or we haven't met with GBI. We've talked to them. We've talked to people at the state crime lab. The Atlanta police turned over everything they have to us. We know what was in the evidence box. Every piece of evidence disappeared shortly after her murder. There was a cover up.
Hmm.
In The Devil You Knew, an innocent man was charged, convicted, and sent to prison for these murders of these girls. With respect to the real life story of Susan Harrell, the woman, who took me under her wing, the police trotted in 3 or 4 young black men and tried to pin the murder on them unsuccessfully
Hmm.
because they had no case against them.
Yeah.
So there are actual parallels
Hmm.
between that experience
Hmm.
and the story of The Devil You Knew.
Hmm.
There are yeah, I'm just reading the chat here.
Yes. if you want to read that out loud.
Oh, no, this is from
Yeah.
Linda. It says, I don't like it when people give authors a 1-star rating or 2 stars, but don't write anything. So the author and readers know why they felt the book was, I agree. I
Yeah,
agree
me too.
100%.
Me
Yeah, I
too.
agree 100%. I will tell you, and I don't want to get ahead of us. You tell me if you don't want to go here, but
I want to go ahead.
so my third book, which
Yes, I
there are
want to go there.
advanced review copies out right
Mm-hmm.
now that are being
Mm-hmm.
reviewed by I don't know, eight or 10 people. It's called You Will Know Me by My Deeds, and it's actually a sequel to The Devil You Knew. But in that book, I have actually reverted back to there's a lot more history in that book.
Mm-hmm.
It's still fiction, but there's a lot more history. And the seed of that history is so this starts in 1981 when The Devil You Knew ended. Several of the main characters are in this book,
Mm-hmm.
but it is centered around the Atlanta child murders and research that I did, detailed research that about a KKK family that lived off of the old Dixie Highway. I've changed their names. I've fictionalized them.
Mm-hmm.
A KKK family who had a stated mission of killing young black children to foment a race riot in Atlanta. An informer, there was an expose done of this, which was not taken up by the mainstream media. An informer was embedded in with this family, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and gleaned a lot of or produced a lot of evidence that they were planning to do this. The Atlanta police and the GBI and the FBI, based on the research I've done, there's a strong indication that they killed the story. They were scared to death that if word got out that the KKK had killed any of these black children,
Yeah.
that there would be race riots.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I believe, based on the research I've done, that Wayne Williams was guilty of some of the murders, but he wasn't guilty of all of the murders.
Mm-hmm. Right.
He was never convicted of murdering one child. He went to prison for murdering 2 adults,
Mm.
but he was convicted in the court of public opinion
Right.
for murdering all the black children. And based on the research I've done, I am pretty convinced that he did not kill all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And this family may very well have been involved in two or three, at least 2 or 3 of the murders of these black children.
Mm-hmm.
So that historical element, which is based on a lot of research I've done, is woven into the story You Will Know Me by My Deeds, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a fictionalized account with that underlying kernel of history, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
if that
Thread
makes
of
sense.
truth. Yeah. Thread of truth woven
Yeah,
through for sure.
yeah.
It sounds fascinating. I'm kind of curious if there is this, cover up and this stifling of evidence, how are you able to research and get some of this information? Like, where do you find it?
So by digging on the internet, there was a fairly extensive expose that was done by actually some writers for Spin magazine, and then it was taken up by a couple of mainstream journals, and there were some articles that I was able to find just by digging and digging on the internet. Um, Keisha Lance Bottoms, when she was mayor, decided to resurrect those cases and reanalyze DNA.
Mm.
Um, Nothing has become of that.
Oh.
Um, so they resurrected it. They supposedly sent off DNA samples to the crime lab for analysis. And, Keisha Lance Bottoms did not you know, did not run for a second term. Andre Dickens supposedly kept the reinvestigation open,
Mm-hmm.
but there has been no published
Mm-hmm.
um, outcome. A lot of the parents, by the way, of the murdered children felt strongly that there was something else to their murders beyond Wayne Williams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of people did suspect that over time, because the story just does not go away, they did suspect over time that there was more to it than what we were finding out, and whether that's the internet and just in general becoming more suspicious, more aware of how things are, how we're told what people want us to believe as opposed to what actually may be sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
I think that I do believe that there's still controversy around it, and maybe something like your new book, which I'm so excited to hear because it's coming out very soon, isn't it? It's
Hopefully December. So we're about to begin we got the press kit pretty much put together.
Mhm.
I'm working with a publicist in California whom I love, and so she's sort of leading that charge. But we should be doing the pre-release publicity soon, and I'm hoping that it'll be out, by the end of the year. That's the
Mhm.
plan.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
excited to read that as well. But what I was thinking is maybe something like this opens the door to these, what Keisha Lance Bottom started and what is now somewhere on Andre Dickens' desk. Maybe, maybe this will provoke somebody to say, hey, this is interesting, and let's see what we might be able to confirm, moving
I would
forward.
love for something like that to happen. Um,
Absolutely.
I had hoped with the Susan Harold, the true crime
Mm-hmm.
case, I had hoped early on that the work that this private investigator, her name is Katie Carter, she lives in Brooklyn, New York. I had hoped that the work that we had done, digging up all of this stuff and getting the police, the murder book, if you will, and talking to a lot of witnesses and people who knew Susan, and actually meeting with one of the suspects.
Mm-hmm.
I had hoped that all of that would result in that case being resurrected. And the Atlanta police have been very cooperative with us. But it's hard to resurrect a case like that when all of the evidence disappeared.
Right.
Um, we were talking to a woman at the state crime lab, and she said, "This just doesn't happen. That does not happen with a murder like this. It
Mm-hmm.
Evidence does not just disappear in thin air."
Right.
But anyway, we had hoped at one point that our efforts might
Mm-hmm.
result in some sort of resolution. I will write the story because I think Susan deserves it,
Mm-hmm.
but I am less and less confident that that case will ever get resolved now.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's 54 years old,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and the evidence, who knows what happened to it.
So Linda is helping us segue into the next part of our conversation. And she says, I noticed that you are doing your own publishing. What made you decide that route? And do you publish any other authors?
Authors, yeah. It's interesting. I never submitted either book or this third book for that matter. Well, I'll talk about the third book because I am working with a publisher, but I never submitted or even contemplated submitting Dead Beckoning or The Devil You Knew to a traditional publisher. I guess for a variety of reasons. I guess it's obvious when I said that I got my PhD in 1980, that pretty much tells you how old I am. Um, I don't want to, I didn't want to go the traditional publishing route and wait potentially years um, to see my book actually published. I've got great editing resources and great critiquing resources. And I also didn't want, and this may sound really egotistical, and I don't want it to come off that way, but I didn't want to turn my book over to a traditional publisher and have them hack away at it.
Mhm.
I just didn't want to do it. And so I decided to self-publish. I am now working with a hybrid publisher in this third book in California, whom I really love, called Waterside Publications. They're in Cardiff by the Sea, down near San Diego. And I'm working on a fourth book, a novella that they will actually be publishing as well,
Mhm.
because I just didn't want to do that heavy lifting anymore. So if I can turn everything over to them and have them publish it, but at the same time not have to worry about them making major changes to it.
Mhm.
So I've been trying to find that balance, and I'm just going to see if the hybrid publishing route works for me. I don't know, Linda, if that really answered your question or not, but that was my decision away. And I haven't published
Yes,
any
thank
other
you.
authors. I haven't published any other authors. I'm
Mhm.
working on a novella right now called Muzzle the Black Dog, which I'm hoping will be released in Q1. Um, and it's loosely based on Eric Rudolph and the Olympic Park bomber.
You know,
Um,
I thought of that as we were talking more than once. The Olympic Park bombing popped into my
yeah.
head. Hmm.
It's probably obvious from The Devil You Knew and Dead Beckoning that it probably seems like I don't know how to write short books. Uh, but finally, Muzzle the Black Dog, I think is going to end up somewhere between 35 and 40,000 words. So it falls into that novella category, which I'm glad that I think I finally figured out how to write something that's less than 140,000 words or whatever. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say I've got both your books here, and they do not come across to me as self-published. Like sometimes it's kind of obvious when something is self-published. I don't get that impression from these
Uh-huh.
at all. You did a great job.
Well, thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
I've got a great team of people that I've worked with. I work with a guy who does all my typesetting, and he's just really, really good. Both books were printed and distributed by Ingram Sparks,
Mhm.
whom I really like a lot because I've discovered I learned that a lot of independent bookstores like buying from Ingram Sparks.
Mhm.
And so the distribution has just it's worked like a charm. And the typesetter that I use has worked with Ingram Sparks for years, so he knew how to produce the interior and the cover in a way that it would come off looking like a really good,
Mhm.
traditionally published book, even though it's not.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And just curious because you've published two books, you've got a third on the way, and yet you come across as a well-seasoned, multi-published author. And out of the gate, you wrote something quite profound and was very well received and highly praised. What do you how did you go about, number one, writing so professionally, but also publishing and being successful with the distribution? Like, how did you learn what to do and to find Ingram Sparks? And like, to me, that's just fascinating.
Well,
Or dumb luck. I don't know.
well, I think a lot of it was dumb luck. Honestly, I think a lot of it was dumb luck. Um, I guess maybe three factors. One, I think some of those the creative writing and literature courses that I took in college helped a lot. Okay. Um, Number two, I have the most incredible writing critique group that I'm part of that I owe so much debt to. I mean, they're acknowledged in both of the books in the back. Um, if I am a good writer, and I aspire to be, if I am a good writer, it's in large part thanks to them. Okay. I mean, it really is. And we're sort of anal. We meet every other Thursday from 10:45 in the morning until sometimes 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the evening,
Wow.
every other Thursday. So it's rigorous. It's really rigorous. And it's meant a lot to me. I learned about Ingram Spark actually through a little writing guild that I'm part of in Blue Ridge, Georgia, called Blue Ridge Poets and Writers Guild. And
Mhm.
one of the women in that group had visited Ingram Spark and was
Mhm.
quite impressed with them and came back and was singing their praises. And that's how I first learned about them.
Mhm. Well, it's
Yeah.
definitely served you well, and you are definitely quite an inspiration
Well, thank you.
as
That makes me feel good.
readers and would-be writers. Now, Deborah has a question that she was saving for the end, and I don't mean if that's at the end, Deborah, when we
It was
um,
he hadn't addressed it yet, so it was just something I wanted to ask.
okay.
Okay, and also Linda asked whether I write poetry. I do not. I did many, many years ago. I was in high school. I was a member of the poetry. We had a poetry club at my high school, and I wrote a lot of poetry back then.
Mhm.
I haven't since, and it's not something that I particularly enjoy doing anymore.
Mhm.
It's just not my bag. I love reading poetry, but
Mhm.
no, so I don't write it. Anyway,
Okay, so Deborah, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for being here today, Mike. As a fellow science person who found my way to mystery fiction, people often assume because of that scientific background that I would be a plotter and not a pantser when I write. So I was curious with you when you're writing your crime fiction, are you an outliner, as people would assume based on your background? And
I
do you have
am a
any?
I am a pantser.
You are? Oh, good.
Yes,
I feel
I
better
am.
now. I'm
I
an
am.
extreme pantser too, so
Yes, I am.
so both
I do
sides of
not
our brains are working.
storyboard. I
Yeah.
have a vague notion, so just not to get too much in the weeds here, but I have a vague notion where my stories are going to go. Obviously, they're historical fiction, so I've got to have some notion where they're going. But in terms of the fictionalized aspect of the stories, my
That's
characters mean everything. They
right.
mean everything to me.
That's
Plot
good.
plot is
Both
secondary.
sides of our brains are firing then, I
Yes,
guess.
yes.
Um,
Plot is secondary, and they talk to me and they tell me where to take the story. I mean, you I'm sure you can relate to that.
yeah.
I've said that to people who aren't writers in the past, and they look at me like I'm from Mars.
You
You
Well,
hear
know.
and
voices in your head? Oh my.
yeah, they wake you up at night.
Oh yes. Oh yes,
Do
definitely.
you have any diehard habits that you follow? I know you have that one hardcore writing day, but any other specific habits that you've developed over time that
N-
never
yeah.
change?
Um,
Location, time of day,
I drink a lot of
methodology.
rye. I drink a lot
Okay.
of rye. No. Um, no, for a long, long time, up until about 2 years ago, I would get up. I'm a morning person, so I would get up at really, really early in the morning, 4:30, and write. I would make my double espresso and I would write. I would just write in the. I've got two places where I write. One in the room I'm in right now. Um, in Midtown, and the other is in our study in Blue Ridge. So those were the places that I would typically write, but I did have that discipline where I would write early in the morning.
Right.
For the past couple of years, for some reason, and I cannot explain why, that's all gone by the wayside. I write anytime that my characters tell me to write. And if they come and, sort of sit on my shoulder and say, okay, it's time to write now, and they inspire me, I write. And it might be in the evening, it might be in the morning, it might be in the middle of the day, it might be at a Starbucks, it might be, it's all fluid now. And it wasn't that way until a couple of years ago. And I can't really explain why.
How many years have you been retired now?
I actually retired. Let me think for a minute. Okay. I retired 3.5 years ago, actually.
Okay.
So yeah,
Maybe it's retirement
Yes.
scheduling kicking in.
maybe,
That's what I was thinking, Deborah.
maybe.
Yeah.
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 The timeline seemed to marry that. So,
Yeah.
well, I know it's hard to believe, but we are at, believe it or not, we're at an hour. And it always amazes me how quickly this hour goes by. And there's still so much conversation to be had. But we're gonna wrap it up. But before we go, I want to mention that Sisters in Crime Atlanta also hosts a monthly reader online program, and it's the first Saturday of the month. It's at the 10 o'clock hour. It's free, open to the public, and what we do is we get together, and just like we are now, and we talk about what we've read, what we're reading, how we like it, and our to be read list grows amazingly. It grows so much during these sessions, and we would love everybody to join us for this. So as a offshoot of that, I have asked Mike to share with us something that he has read and recommends. And Mike, take it away.
Okay. So, you want to just tell you one or a few? I mean,
Yes, tell us
okay.
a few.
Okay. So in the historical fiction category, recently I read Amor Towles' The Lincoln Highway. I don't
Oh,
know
yeah,
whether
I've
any of
heard
you
it.
have.
A friend of mine is reading that and
I
recommended
highly
it.
recommend it. It is a wonderful work of historical fiction. And I also am a friend. I don't know whether you know Thomas Mullen. He lives in Decatur. He's written several books, some of which have been critically acclaimed. Tom wrote a book called Darktown, which is based in Atlanta. It's historical fiction. And I highly recommend that book as well. And then I guess the third book, maybe I would mention, that's also written by a friend of mine, and I think you're probably aware of it, is Robert Gwaltney's The Cicada Tree,
Yes.
which is just a wonderful, wonderful work of Southern Gothic magical realism. Yeah, and I was telling Dawn before everybody got on. Robert has written just a really, really nice blurb for me for this third book that we're about to publish that will go on the back cover. I love Robert Gwaltney. I think he's a great guy in general. He's a great literary citizen, if you will, and a great writer. It's a keen sense of voice. So I highly recommend The Cicada Tree if you haven't read it.
I have read it, and when Mike and I started talking about Robert, what had happened was I shared with him, because it is mentioned that one of the genres that Mike likes to write in, and I know I'm extending our convo, but here we go, is the Southern literary fiction. And I was like, well, I don't know if I know exactly what that is. And I fell down the biggest rabbit hole right before I was supposed to get online for this, researching that. And Mike mentioned Robert, and I said, that's exactly, like, he was someone who popped into my head
Yeah,
when I was learning more about that. So, and
yeah,
surprisingly, I already knew a lot about it. I just hadn't associated it with Southern literary fiction. So I think
Well, and
it'll
I shared with Dawn, I'm a huge fan of Flannery O'Connor. I love Carson McCullers, and I just there is something about Southern fiction. There's this Gothic element that runs through a lot of Southern fiction that some literary critics have opined that, and it's sort of unique, I think, to Southern fiction, that there is a parallel or a root that goes all the way back to the Southern historical experience that other parts of the country did not experience.
Mhm.
And it's just a really interesting, it's a unique characteristic, I think, that other parts of the country don't share.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
and it is sort of a Gothic. A lot of Southern literature is a little twisted, a little and Gothic.
mhm.
And Robert, certainly Flannery O'Connor falls in that category. Robert Gwaltney's work does as well.
Mhm. Faulkner.
Faulkner, most
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, he's one of my.
Although I will tell you, I there's a tool that you can use in Word that will analyze your work and tell you what reading level it's at and what and your average sentence word count,
Mhm.
etc. And I think my average sentence word count for what I'm working on right now, Muzzle the Black Dog, is maybe 8 or 9 words. Faulkner drives me a little crazy because I mean he can write a sentence that takes up an entire page.
Absolutely.
I struggle with that. And the
Absolutely.
diametric opposite of that is probably Hemingway or somebody
Mhm.
who believed in, the economy of words. But I still love Faulkner, but he's just I struggle a little bit with his sentences, which are eminently diagrammable,
Yes.
but very long.
Yes. What is this tool you mentioned in Word?
Oh,
I'm
so
not
in
aware of it.
Word, I'll have to look. It's if you go to you, first of all, you have to turn it on and you have to go to your preferences somewhere and make sure it's turned on. But if you go to tools and you go to spelling and grammar, no, that's not it. Where is it? I tell you what, I'm going to have to find it and I will send
All
it to
right.
you. It's really interesting. I'll tell you, I've got a good friend. I've known him since ninth grade. He's also a writer. His name is Kurt Shannon, and he told me about it. I had no
Mhm.
idea that it existed. And
It is amazing what these everyday tools that we use, Microsoft Word, Excel, that, we just use them. We use this much. It's like our brain. We use this much, and there's this much that they're capable of doing. You just
yes,
have to
yeah,
tap into it literally.
yeah. The one tool that I hope we all will be obsessive about avoiding is AI.
Yeah.
Um, unless we're using it for research or something like that. It's
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
I worry about AI
Mhm. Yeah, there
from a
was a
writing standpoint.
Yeah, I want to say it might have been Jane Friedman not that long ago. She went on a bit of a rant because AI had duplicated her style and they were actually publishing books she did not write and utilizing her name. And it was a big deal. And it's very frightening, honestly. I think it's very
Yeah.
frightening. So,
Well, my publisher now, I don't remember the exact wording, but my publisher has insisted that we put in the front of the book, in the front matter on the copyright page, a a notice that says nothing in this book is to be used by AI, to facilitate
mhm.
the creation of content. Or I forget exactly what the
Mhm.
wording is, but I never
Yeah,
would have even thought about putting that in the front matter
right.
if my publisher hadn't
Starting to
said,
put it in publishing contracts too.
Yeah,
So
I think
Okay.
it's a great idea.
you
I mean,
Yes.
it
book
won't
yourself on
stop.
AI.
Yeah, it
Yes.
won't stop someone from doing it, but at least you've done something to, try to prevent it and protect yourself. So
Yeah.
your
I
work.
read something on Medium. Actually, one of my writing group members shared it with me. Something on Medium from a woman who wrote a book, and somebody has taken her entire book and published it with a different cover and a different title on Amazon and is selling it on Amazon.
Unbelievable.
The entire book, the same book.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So,
Yeah, Linda is familiar with that.
yeah.
Mike, she said so. Well, everyone, this has been great. We did go a little over. I so appreciate you guys being here. I especially appreciate you being here, Mike.
Well, thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. As I said, I'm looking forward to the next installment that's coming out very soon, and we'll definitely have to get together and get me a copy and have it autographed to add to
Let's
my
do it.
collection. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And hopefully we will see you at Murder by the Book, which, as I mentioned, is the first Saturday of the month. You can get all of our information on the Sisters in Crime Atlanta website, sistersincrimeatlanta.com. Yeah, Sisters in Crime Atlanta spelled out .com. And you'll find all information plus on our Facebook page.
And
Mike,
Thank you so much.
thank
Thanks to all of you.
you.
Thank you,
don't
Dawn.
forget
Thank you,
about
Mike.
our November workshop too.
Oh, yes, Sharon, do you want to chat? Do you want to mention that real quick? Or Deborah? Deborah posted a great post about reminding everybody about that. That's coming up. Sorry to put you on the spot, Deborah. You're muted.
I know I have a difficult environment today, so that's why
Okay.
I'm on and off. Yes, Saturday, November 9th, we're hosting the annual Sisters in Crime workshop, and it's featuring our keynote speaker, Wanda Morris, and VM Burns and Tanisha Curtis, and we'll be talking about how to write your mystery. So it's an all-day event, and the registration is available, the details on our website, and the cost is $40, which includes a delicious free lunch.
Very good.
Yes, and that's live in person at the DeKalb
Yes.
County Decatur branch.
Yes, the Georgia Center for the Book,
Yes.
the lower level of the library.
Yes. All right. Well, happy Saturday to all. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. This has been a wonderful start to my Saturday. Thank you so much.
And get out and enjoy this wonderful weather.
Yes, we're very lucky. It's gorgeous here in Atlanta.
All right, take care.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.